Alt-rock duo 21 Pilots have spent the last 10 years building one of the most expansive stories. Instead of one traditional concept album, Tyler Joseph and Josh Dunn gave us 5. Blurryface, Trench, Scaled and Icy, Clancy, and Breach all come together to tell the story of Dima, Clancy, Nico, and the Banditos as one massive metaphor for struggling with mental health and faith. Their discography might be the best modern example that true narrative storytelling is not confined to the page and the screen. But it also raises new questions about how streaming platforms have changed the way that we interact with music completely. When they first officially released Drag Path, a previously only for purchase track on Spotify, fans were distraught that it had been changed to honor the fans who had paid for it months prior. Some fans went as far as to say that we shouldn't have to pay for music at all and suggested that artists are getting greedy, even though the free streaming model has only been around for 20-something years.
Story Step.
It's like book club, but it's more than books, and it's not quite a club.
Welcome back to Story Stack. I'm Ansley.
I'm Gabriel.
I'm Lily.
And today's episode is all about 21 Pilots. I know for this episode, I gave y'all kind of a lot of homework. I'm not sorry about it because I love 21 Pilots, but I am interested on just your initial thoughts of the music, the vibes, the lore. What do you guys think?
I'm going to say let me start because I didn't watch the 2-hour lore video. I watched the 11-minute option. Okay, I was given 2 options. I was given, okay, watch this band video, and then you can watch either this 10-minute or this 11-minute debrief or this 2-hour debrief. Now listen, being the college girly that I am, who is reading for myself, reading for this, and doing homework and working, I chose the 11-minute option. Sue me. But I didn't realize. I knew that 21 Pilots did concept albums. Of course, like that's pretty like well known that their like story goes beyond each individual song. And I mean 21 Pilots is a like major it's a major phenomenon in the world. Maybe they're not, I don't think they're like as prevalent today as they might have been in like the mid 2010s. Like I remember hearing them and being like, oh my gosh, this is like peak music. And then I think that's like a common thing of like, I feel like they kind of disappeared from my life, not because I actively chose to avoid them, but they just weren't everywhere anymore. And watching the band intro video and like basically how like Clancy came to be and the story about the lore of these multiple albums, the visuals were so cool. They seemed so intentional, and we've talked about intentional storytelling on this podcast before. Once again, like this is just like such a cool thing to witness an artist, a music artist, put such intentionality in their work. And like this is the sort of commitment that I don't think I've seen before in music. I've heard of concept albums, they're a thing. But this fact that there is this almost like 5-album series, so cool and interesting to dive into. And also the fact that you can appreciate each individual song for what it is, while it also connecting to a bigger lore, is kind of amazing too.
See, student Lily over here. I watched the 2-hour explainer. Okay, I watched the 2-hour explainer. I watched the 2 music videos that Ansley linked for us. And I went back and I listened to not all of the tracks of the albums, but quite a few tracks from the album. I was telling Ansley earlier that my hot take, having just listened to a huge chunk of 21 Pilots, is that Blurryface is their best album. I think is the most interesting musically. Not saying their follow-up albums were bad, but I do think they were doing the most interesting music there. But yeah, for the record, I'm in the same boat as Lily. I'm the oldest one here at this podcast. So the thing is, when 21 Pilots blew up in the mid-2010s, I was the perfect like young adult age to really get swept up in it. And I didn't. And going through all of this discography has kind of made me nostalgic for something that never happened to me. I wish I had gotten swept up because I think I would be in the same situation as Ansley, a rabid Ultra fan.
I love that you bring up the idea of the nostalgia element because, yes, like so many of the fans just have sort of natural nostalgia to it. I started listening to 21 Pilots in 2014 when I was 11. So it's now been over 10 years and like over half of my life. But it's also, they're so self-referential in their music. And it's such a fun rabbit hole to go down, even with things like the overarching lore to the music. The final track on Breach, their latest album, Intentions, is actually a track from Vessel, the end of that album, called Truce. It's the Truce instrumental just reversed. So if you go and listen to Intentions reversed, it's just Truce, which is crazy to me. But it's also the last couple of seconds of Intentions are actually the first couple of seconds of Heavy Dirty Soul, the opening for Blurry Face. So it's all just one big cycle. And I think it's so much fun to listen to. And like really, it feels rewarding to me to like go down a rabbit hole and find all the connections. I was talking earlier, one of the albums, Skilled and Icy, was like super big 180 for them sonically and aesthetically. And a lot of people like didn't understand the connection to the Lord first. I had like a straight up crime scene investigation board of sticky notes and red tape on my high school closet trying to like map the connections. And it's just, I personally, I know it's not for everybody, but I love when something that seems like it would be straightforward, like an album, is not straightforward at all. And there is a path you can take to play around with it. You know, another really popular good example is Taylor Swift with all of her Easter eggs in her music. I really appreciate stuff like that. It makes it so much more enjoyable to me, I think. But getting into just like a real brief history of the lore to kind of go over how intense and how expansive this world building is. The album Blurry Face was released in 2015. It was actually also, side note, their only album to win a Grammy.
Oh,
so
neat.
Know that you're validated and thinking that's the favorite. But yeah, so that was released in 2015, and that sort of introduced the idea of the lore. In some of the songs, there's one called, it's Doubt. It's Doubt. In the bridge, he talks about, chewing on the bishops, gnaw away at the system. That's the first real reference we ever get to things, but that was sort of a retroactive edition, like I said, with Breach, sort of referencing back to Heavy Dirty Soul. Trench, released in 2018, is really where the story kicked off. There's a whole, when I say like there's a rabbit hole to go down with this band, it is not just the music. They had a whole like secret website that wasn't connected to them. They were sending out real mail from like the citizens of Dima and the bishops. Like it was crazy. They went all out. But with the rollout of Trench, there was a website called Dima.org. It had a whole bunch of letters from a character named Clancy talking about the city he lived in called Dima. Fans dove into this. I remember I was actually on vacation when their first single from that dropped. Changed my life. I was like, I'm locked in for life now, actually. Most songs on that album reference the lore. And that's where we're introduced to Clancy, who lives in a city called Dima that is run by these bishops. And they are, and really the rest of the lore is a metaphor for mental health struggles. All of this is Tyler Joseph, the lead singer, his attempt at sort of coping and processing and learning how to deal with his own struggle with depression. I'm just, to pose a question, very curious if you guys have ever experienced, maybe not in music, but another form of art or another form of media that really stuck with you as like a coping, like watching an artist do their own thing, cope with their own problems, and it resonate with you.
This isn't necessarily like me experiencing someone else's art and then using that as cope, but I find that, I mean, we're all writers, and those that are really, I think, invested in writing, like that's what they want to do. It's not just a hobby. Like that is coping. I think that there is something so cathartic about putting like your wild, weird thoughts down onto a blank page and finding a way to make sense of like the wildness in your brain. So like to me, it's not necessarily experiencing other people's art that is like max coping for me. I definitely find that when I am creating art, probably just like, I mean, the creator of all these songs, like it's the creator that I think is experiencing the most benefit from the art. And then us as listeners, viewers, readers, we get to experience a sort of shadow of that coping that the artist must have felt.
It makes me think of there's a comic book writer that I've been a big fan of for a while. His name is Donny Cates. His probably biggest credit is the reason that Venom, the Spider-Man villain, is like had his own movies is basically solely because of Donny Cates' like work on the character and bringing him up in like popular limelight. He has Donny Cates has a quote about how his writing is really just free therapy for himself. Like he jokes about that quite often, that it's like, I don't need to pay for therapy because I just put it all on the page. And honestly, respectable.
I like both of those sort of answers. I think I love Venom, so I'm glad to know that there's like a story behind that character, or at least the conception of him, I guess. But going back, Lily, to the point about us being writers, I think for me, outside of just being a fan for most of my life, is part of why I'm so drawn to this lore and love talking about it and spending time with it, is that I really do feel like this is the best example, the best modern example of narrative storytelling in music. You know, you see concept albums are not a new thing. They're not necessarily a novel thing anymore, but the thought and dedication and care that went into this and to spread it out over 5 albums, it is its own story. And I think that we really just don't talk enough about concept albums being a story, that it's not just music to listen to. It's not something to throw on. There is a story there. There are morals to it. You get the same sort of enrichment, I suppose, from reading a book that really connects with you that way. And I think with Trench is really where the first narrative elements get introduced. We get our first characters, we get the setup. We've got Clancy living in this city that forces people to embrace their struggles, to embrace their depression, to feed into it, that teach that self-harm is a way of coping, is the way of coping. And then Clancy gets introduced to the Banditos, which is our rebel group that lives on the outside of Dima in the continent of Trench, which is where the name comes from. And they sort of show him another way. They show Clancy another way. And their ringleader, the torchbearer, as he's come to called later on in the story, is sort of the leading man that coordinates. He's also played by Josh Dunn, the drummer. So those are their 2 main characters in this lore. But he really teaches Clancy how to see things in a different light, I suppose. But then we get Scaled and Icy. This is released in 2021. So we're right in the middle of COVID. And I think that outside of the lore, that was sort of a step of experimenting with sound, experimenting with what direction they wanted to go in, because this album was so different than any other 21 Pilots album. A lot of their previous stuff aesthetically was dark colors. I mean, coming off of Blurry Face, which was blacks and reds and really harsh imagery, and Trench, which was like camo jumpsuits and yellow duct tape and like still kind of gritty feeling. Scaled and Icy were pastel pinks and blues. There was a giant dragon on the cover. Like the Tyler Joseph dyed his hair pink. Like it was just so much brighter looking. And the songs themselves sounded so much poppier than anything they'd ever done. But lyrically, there was still so much happening. This album ended up being in the storyline that at the end of Trench, Clancy gets captured by the bishops. He's brought back to Dima and he's forced to make propaganda music. Basically, he's caused this huge public stir, shaken the public's trust in the bishops. They force him to sort of retract his statements, put out stuff about how great Dima is. And a lot of fans ended up not connecting with this album. A lot of fans didn't like it. They pulled back from the band. They didn't participate. I want to say that was one of their lowest selling tours after they had like been established. And I guess to me, I liked the album. I appreciated that it was different. I loved the deep dive in trying to find the connections, but I understand why other people didn't like it. How do you guys feel about the idea of art diverging so heavily from the expectation for the sake of the story.
I think, okay. I think that with all things, I'm going to bring it back to intentionality, I guess, because you are allowed to diverge, but you set up promises. In the beginning, the first album, you're making a promise. And then by the end of that album, you've made a promise for the next one. Now, not everyone listening to these albums are die-hard fans. They probably are, most of them, 90% of them, are probably listening at a surface level. This is the type of music that I like. This is them. This is the sort of lyrics that they do, the sort of visuals they do. And if they're not paying attention and they're not seeing the intentionality behind the shift, it makes sense why 90% of them that are coming for this specific sound that aren't there for all the lore and the storytelling and intentionality, they're there for 5 steps back, would be disappointed to see such a shift because they haven't been paying close enough attention to realize that this is where it's been going and where it has to go in order for the story to progress.
To give another music example, one of my favorite currently operating indie artists is Snail Mail. That's the music project of Lindsay Jordan. And she hit mainstream for an indie artist, but mainstream popularity with the album Lush, which I gotta get fact checked on this, I think came out in 2018. Lush had this indie pop, indie punk sound that like really resonated with a lot of people. It felt very unique at the time, and it really catapulted her into stardom. Just recently, she released her most recent album, which is a huge diversion from that sound, at least. I would say that it has some country elements to it, maybe a little like country pop sound. And I think something like that is maybe the biggest issue when you talk about an artist changing their sound, at least for the purpose of music, is that for this example, at least, it kind of felt like she was trend chasing because country music has been getting more and more popular. So perhaps it did come from a place of like of heart and desire to really cultivate a country sound, but there's that nagging part in you that's like, did she just do this because she wanted to get more mainstream success? And I do wonder if that was like a resonant feeling for the 21 Pilots fan base when Scaled and Icy came out. If they were like, okay, maybe they're doing something artistic, but is this just trend chasing a more pop sound?
I will say I don't recall seeing any allegations of like trend chasing or sellout sort of ideas. But I do know that a lot of people, like Lily was saying, like this is casual listeners. It's not the same as their previous stuff, just weren't into it. But then their next release, Clancy, won a lot of fans back. It sort of returned to that. I hesitate to say rock because this is a whole separate side conversation with 21 Pilots and what genre they truly belong in because they're all over the place. But Clancy was the return to that sort of like alt rock, pop rock sort of sound that they became known for. And initially, it came out 2024. It was introduced as the final installment of the lore. In all of the marketing, it was saying like, this is the end. Like, we're going to get the end of the story. And it was probably the most explicit outside of Trench in the actual storytelling and what it educated us on the lore. This is over the previous 3 albums. Clancy has escaped from Dima. By the end of Scaled and Icy, he's on a different island in this world with the Torchbearer. They're like prepping to go back and take Dima and beat the bishops. So a lot of this album is him understanding his approach to this and understanding that it's coming. But there also starts being seeds of doubt in him and in his abilities. And we get this idea. There's a song on there called Backslide, which is one of my favorites. And it's the idea of like, I have barely gotten back to a baseline and I can already feel myself slipping. And so as the album progressed, a lot of people, especially at the end of that album, that final track, Paladin Straight, does not feel like a close. It left too many open questions. We get like right up to the final battle between Clancy and Nico, the head bishop, and then it just ends. And so a lot of people started asking, like, is this truly the end? It was confirmed by the band later on in a live stream that it wasn't. But in this one, you get sort of the beginnings of the idea that this might not be a battle he can win. And that's delivered on fully in Breach. Before we move on to Breach, one thing that I do want to point out about Clancy and its production that I thought was really cool is that they did a music video for every song on this album. It ended up, they had to delay the release, I think, by a week or two in order to have the time to get all of the videos put together. But it's the visual storytelling in those. We get to see so much more of the continent of Trench. We get to see the dynamic between Clancy and the Torchbearer. And one of the things, Gabriel, I think you had mentioned earlier about different interpretations, another huge part of 21 Pilots' discography is that I think it is never meant to isolate anyone's interpretation. The band's been very vocal about their beliefs and their relationship with God as Christians, their faith, how that works in their music. They have a lot of imagery and symbolism, but it's done in a way where you could also interpret this as a non-religious thing and is just a story of mental health struggles and finding something to get you through it. So the character of Torchbearer, the leader of the Banditos, is elaborated on a lot more in Clancy. We see that he's been with Clancy on this whole journey, but then we get to a point where he disappears, and then it cuts back through earlier bits in the videos, and it shows that he was never really there. In the lore, in the world, they refer to it as he's projection himself to Clancy to sort of lead him through. And that's the lore's explanation of it, but it also aligns so closely with the idea of the Holy Spirit being there for you in every moment, even though it's not physically there with you. And as this whole story came to a close, they really got really talented at walking that line of allowing for multiple interpretations. And so I think when we get to Breach, the lead single off of that, the first song on the track, it's City Walls. That is the actual close to the lore. The rest of the Breach album is not explicitly connected. It's its own thing. It's its own attempt at processing the end of all of this lore. But in that, I think, is such a beautiful and faithful experience of struggling with mental health, in that for the last 10 years, Nico, the bishop, has been a representation of depression. It has been the physical personification of Tyler Joseph's depression. Tyler Joseph playing the character of Clancy, who's fighting Nico. At the end, Clancy becomes Nico. And then the Torchbearer and the other Banditos say, we lost this time. It's time to go find the next Clancy. And it's the idea, and it caught so many fans off guard. But when you go back through, like you've said, it's so intentional. There's so many hints of it you can see in earlier tracks. But it's the idea depression is not something you beat. It's not something that goes away. You just learn to live with it. And so with this next installment of, Clancy becoming Nico and the cycle starting all over again, the black paint that 21 Pilots has become really known for on their hands and their neck, it's getting lower and lower on Nico's face, sort of really representing the idea of you don't ever beat it, but you learn how to deal with it better.
It's a good thing I watched that 2-hour explainer so I could understand the significance of the black paint. Sure would have been crazy if I only watched the 11-minute explainer.
I come with alternative viewpoints, okay? Maybe we need to see what the person listening from 5 steps back feels and heard. And I'm not blinded by the lore, and I'm not blinded by fandom, okay? So I offer a different... I'm just a third view of these wonderful albums.
But I honestly kind of appreciate that you guys watch the different videos, because I think it just really emphasizes the point that concept albums are never meant to isolate a listener. I hope that even though you didn't have the full 2-hour experience and breakdown, you could still kind of tell what was going on. You still enjoyed the music. But if you have the time and are willing to put in the work, there is a whole world of a story to really dive into. And I think that it's such a cool thing, and it's such a unique and interesting niche that concept albums fill.
Now, I said it at the beginning, but I can't stress enough how much going through this band's history and the history of the lore and how it deals with depression, it felt like I was looking at some parallel world of my own life of like, I was the perfect prime demographic to be involved in this, and just for whatever life reasons I didn't. But I think of my own time frame from 2014 to today, and I think about how much I really could have used some wild, cohesive music project that dealt with the depths of depression and how to fight it and how to accept that it never goes away, but you just get a little better at processing it each time. And like, yeah, I think this is a powerful vehicle for storytelling, and I wish I was there for it.
No, because tell me why 12-year-old Lily was like vibing so hard to Stressed Out for no reason. Girl, you had nothing to be stressed out about. You were 12. But I think it's so funny because Gabriel, you say like you were the prime demographic, but Ansley and I were both like younger than maybe what the intention out, like who they were trying to capture, and yet I feel like it harnessed something in like that mid Gen Z area, and like it just gripped our generation for some reason. I also think our generation was obsessed with being like really deep and like I'm too cool for like certain stuff, and like I have these big emotions. Yeah, like I'm stressed out, but I mean, I yeah.
I also think too, just in like as somebody that has like made the journey with the band for the last 10 years, Breach coming out when it did, which aside from the lore is an album that is very much about processing your own feelings and realizing that like you might not be living the life you thought you were, or that you may be meant to, and having to reconcile that after that realization. For that to come out when I turned like 21, really a perfect time for that. Like end of junior year of college, beginning of senior year, like right on the cusp of the job market. It was such a perfect thing. And so I agree that even though we might have been a little young to really connect with what they were saying, it was still just it really just resonated with me. So, but to shift here into some of the bigger conversations about this outside of the concept album, streaming. The streaming model, free or paid for, has undeniably changed the way that we interact with music. And I think 21 Pilots made a really perfect example of that, or provided a perfect example of that, because a week or two after Breach released in September of 25, they announced they were going to do a special limited edition digital release. It included a couple of pictures from the album, a little booklet of things, but it also had a deluxe track called Drag Path. It was up for a week for sale. It was $7.99. A lot of people went back and forth about buying it. There was a lot of online discourse. Most people did not buy it because they felt it was going to be put on streaming after a week or two. Not me. I bought it immediately.
Super fan.
But it did not go up a week or two afterwards, and people were pissed. A lot of people were like kicking themselves online for not buying it, but more people were insinuating that it was greedy, that it was a bad move for the band, and that music should not be something we have to pay for. This conversation ended up picking back up in February of this year because they ended up finally releasing it on Spotify. But in order to, in their words, respect the fans that had already paid for it, it was a different version of the song. The one that was released on streaming had cut probably half of the verses from the original version and had a different instrumentation style that sort of made the streaming version move faster. To me, it just feels like the streaming version is better suited for radio play, whereas the original version was the true artist processing their own feelings version. But this reignited the conversation of, fans were pissed. Fans were mad. I saw some people saying that they didn't even want the streaming version anymore because it wasn't the same song. And it just opens up such an interesting conversation because it was only 20 years ago that you had to pay for music in order to hear it. We're only 25 years, maybe-ish, removed from buying CDs and vinyls and that being the only way you could hear a song outside of the radio. And at first, it was something that I thought was really silly. But then you take a step back. If these are 14-year-olds commenting, they have never known a world without free streaming on Spotify or Apple Music or YouTube even. How do we feel about the idea? Is our paywalls for media becoming outdated?
Okay, I love taking a radical take on this podcast, so I'm going to start with that and we'll see where it goes. I think with how business models, and especially something like Spotify, which we just do not have the time to get into how shitty of a model for music Spotify is, artists barely see any of the money that comes from Spotify or basically any streaming platform. The way that music models are going, the best way for an artist to make money off of music is to just give it out for free entirely and then direct fans, like loyal fans, to like a Patreon model or something like that to support the music, the artists directly instead of going through a corporate channel. So when I think the example that you gave, when I think about these 14-year-old kids who have literally grown up in a world where they didn't have to pay directly for music, I think the genie's out of the bottle. I don't think we can break that cycle. I don't think we can go back to paying for music. I think the only step forward is to get more radical with it, give all the music out for free, and then let the super fans support you.
And it's like what you're saying is already happening. I mean, the fact that music is you can't put it back. Like, it's out there. We're used to streaming music, just paying a subscription to something like Spotify. And I mean, you mentioned the fact that like a Patreon type thing is how artists are like can potentially make money, but also like merch and releasing seasonal things. That's, I think, a big part of why artists are able to continue making music, because clearly the making of the music itself is not how you're making money anymore. The music itself is the thing that you love, that's the passion, but then you have to do so many extra things to actually make that your livelihood. I have to think about Taylor Swift and her like merch things where she'll have like 4 different vinyls. It's the same exact album, but it's different colors. And she gets a lot of backlash for that because, of course, it's promoting consumerism and kind of just wasting like environmental resources. Like, why do you need 4 vinyls of the same exact album? And there's pros and cons to making like merch your direct like way of making money, but who is going to pay for Taylor Swift like Patreon? I mean, not just like she has super fans. I know. Okay, like there are crazy
Don't cover the Swifties. Don't cover the Swifties. We'll be dead.
No, because I am a Swiftie. Okay, listen, I am a Swiftie, and I've listened to all her albums and like have enjoyed them all at different stages in life. Okay, but like. There are crazy people out there. Not crazy.
It's over.
We're just going to cut all of this. This cannot go on air.
I'm keeping it.
Okay. Backtracking. There are people out there that would just throw money at people that are millionaires. There is a like famous like live stream that Selena Gomez did, I think on Instagram or something, and realized that people were sending her money and was like, no, don't do that. Like, don't do that. So we know that there are people out there that are giving millionaires, billionaires, like money, but if you already have that level of success, like you're no longer honing the like small community fan vibe, and you have to, I think, resort to merch and like special editions of things, deluxe albums being released in increments. Like I want to say that Midnights by Taylor Swift had like the like Before Dawn, After Dusk, like those different things that like just make people want to buy. You're getting more content, but also keep buying the same thing over and over again.
I agree with you because Patreon just, to me, feels like small artist. And that's not to disparage the people that are using Patreon, but when I think about it, it's like YouTube creators that I watch have a Patreon, or, you know, small bookish Instagrammers and TikTokers have Patreon sort of things. I don't think of Taylor Swift having a Patreon. I also think concert tickets are a huge source of income.
Well, yeah, if we're being honest
if we're
here,
including that part.
yeah, that's how musicians are making all of their money, basically. It's all touring money is the maximum where all the money's coming from.
And even that, they're not the reason why ticket prices are the like insane amount that they are. A lot of that has to do with resellers and venues, and that's a whole other like can of worms that we don't have to like open here, and we'll probably talk about like some other time.
The thing that I think to put a bow on this topic at least is that when we started like the conception of this episode and doing the research, yeah, I heard about this idea of fans being angry about having to pay for this specific track, or at least a specific version of Drag Path. And at first I was like, that's crazy. Like, people shouldn't be mad that they have to pay for music. But the more I think about just the sheer degeneracy that is music streaming platforms, I actually don't think it's crazy to be angry that you have to pay for music, especially for the people who grew up in a world that never had to pay for music.
I think it's just it's a can of worms. And I think that this is just another instance of the world is changing, and it's changed in a million ways. But the biggest changes, I'd say, in the last couple of years, especially since COVID and especially since the writer's strike, is how media is changing and how the ways that we interact with media is changing. We've seen it in films and in TV with AI replacing actors and voice actors. We see it in books with AI being accused of writing some books recently that were published by big publishing houses. And I think now we're really seeing it with streaming and music. And that's not to say it hasn't popped up before. I know there was a lot of controversy with like AI artists on Spotify, but now we're seeing it affecting real artists. And it's not even an AI issue. This is just a consumerism issue and how we're interacting with the media and how we're getting it.
I think ultimately what we should take from this is recognizing that if you have an artist that you love, especially a small artist that you want to support, streaming if that's all you can do, obviously that's not nothing, but recognizing where you're putting your dollars, and if like maybe buying that CD from that artist that just released their, sophomore album, that you loved the first album and they're still growing, and this sophomore album could really like make or break them. Like, just recognizing that putting money there and supporting the artist that you care for does make all the difference in the world.
I have a 21 Pilots question that I need an expert to answer.
Go ahead.
Oh, I have an expert here. Okay, so going through, again, the 2-hour explainer video and really digging into the lore and history and what the band is itself, it seems like the majority of the lore is created by Tyler Joseph, and Josh Dunn just kind of hangs out and drums a lot. Is that correct?
Okay, so yes and no. It started that way. So the band originally, with their first album release, it was Tyler Joseph and 2 other men that were not Josh Dunn in the band. They both left. I don't think there's any bad blood. It just wasn't working out scheduling wise. And so Josh Dunn came in after that. Really fun fact, there are actually pictures of Josh Dunn in the crowd at some of the very first 21 Pilot shows in Ohio. Really cool, just like for a fan to see, I guess. But in the beginning, when Josh first joined the band, he was not very vocal about it because he had social anxiety. He was very nervous about being in front of people, being on stage. With the last couple of albums, he did take more of kind of the front seat. I don't necessarily want to say specifically that he wasn't involved in the creative direction of the first couple of albums. We just don't have a ton of information about it. With these last 2 albums, we know, he actually came in and sang on some of the tracks, which was huge. I'm not going to lie, I cried the first time I heard the Jokels. But he also like strongly advocated for some of the best tracks to stay on the album because Tyler Joseph did not want to run them, which is crazy. Some of like genuinely the best tracks, Downstairs from Breach, almost didn't make the cut. Routines in the Night almost didn't make the cut. Crazy. But no, I do see from the outside it has kind of appeared like this is the Tyler Joseph show. It is not. It is a pretty equal effort.
Something that I wonder is when creating a series of albums like this, it requires something different than what other artists do. And I think for a lot of artists, the albums that they release tend to reflect the time that they are in their life when creating it. And now it's not like obviously the time when it comes out, because usually the album has been written a year or two before you actually get to see it. But it matches up sort of with the artist's life and their experiences as they grow up and go through different things. But when you have a concept album, and not only just one, but like a series of them, I wonder almost how the albums progress, if it has room for that same like artist progression, because you also are committed to a narrative that you have started that you potentially have outgrown. And I just have to wonder how you continue something like that.
I think that's actually a really good question, because that's something that I haven't seen necessarily debated in online discourse, but I have strong feelings about. A lot of people have talked about, like, with the idea of them being self-referential, with certain references in older songs ending up becoming more impactful later on down the road. But the idea of like, oh, they were planting the seeds for this all the way back in this song. I think 21 Pilots with their concept albums have something kind of unique, because it is not like they're telling a different story. This is still his story. Like, he's working through his own emotions through this story. A different concept album that comes to mind that's not doing the same thing is My Chemical Romance's Danger Days. That was based off of a comic that Gerard Way was writing that was not necessarily his own experiences. And so I don't know how sustainable something like that would be. But because the 21 Pilots lore is growing with Tyler Joseph and Josh Dun as they're experiencing their mental health struggles, I think that it does allow them that space to grow. But I also think inherent in that process is that they're able to take older content and pull it back up and reference it in a more explicit way. Because to me, it has always just felt like something they were talking about in the early days that they might not have had the best words for at the time, they found the words for. And so they bring it back. And so I think with this, it's just so ingrained into their own growth that it is sustainable for them, and that made it kind of easier for them to do it that way.
And if you rearrange the words that they found, it creates an anagram that tells you about a secret upcoming album that you didn't even know existed.